I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
Assalamu alaikum viewers. We are back with our next program. In today's program, we are going to study a beautiful poem, Daffodils, written by the poet Wordsworth, and it is taken from your 9th class English textbook. Do you know anything about the poet Wordsworth? Well, he was born in 1770 and he died in 1850, and he lived in Lake District, the most beautiful area in the world. At that time, industrialization had already started destroying the beauty of the countryside. And the poet Wordsworth wrote about the necessity and beauty of nature in human life and about life on planet Earth. In that way, we can take him as one of the main or great thinkers who raised their voice against pollution, which is a very common problem these days. Well, before we actually read the poem, can you tell me if you've read any poem in English or in Urdu? Well, I can safely say that very often the poets talk about beauty. And can you define beauty? It's very difficult to define beauty. Well, beauty can be found in nature, human beings, and the work of man or the man-made world. Now let's see this beautiful picture, the scenery in which you see flowers. This is natural beauty. Another picture in which you see a child and a woman painted by the artist. Yet another picture in which you see a beautiful building made by man. And again, you also find beauty in the aspect of music. What Wordsworth wrote about is, it was beauty of nature. And in this poem, he talks about daffodils. Now, can you tell me in which aspects can you find beauty of nature? Sky, mountains, trees, green fields, rivers. Very good. These are aspects of beauty of nature. So Wordsworth chose to write about daffodils in this poem. Some of you may have seen a daffodil. It's a very delicate flower, and there's only one flower at the end of each stem. The colors are very rich. It is yellowish, rich color in the middle and white around it, and it certainly looks like a star. It usually grows near the river banks, and when you see them from a distance, they look like fields of mustard. Well, with that description, I'm sure you must have a picture of how a daffodil looks and the beauty of nature and the beauty of daffodil. Now let's come to some work and let's study. Up till now we have been talking about the poet and the poem, and let's listen to the recitation of Daffodil now.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
Well, did you enjoy the poem and the scenery? Well, I think it was wonderful. And I think we are proud of our country because of this beautiful scenery we have and beautiful places we have. Let's come back to our textbook. Now, when you open your book and you find this poem Daffodils, and when you read it, you'll find that this poem is divided into 4 sections. These sections are called stanzas. When you read the first stanza, the second, the third, and the fourth, I will show you 4 different pictures, and you'll have to match the pictures with the stanzas. So let's read the first stanza.
I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze.
So you heard the first stanza. In the first stanza, there are hills, clouds, and a lonely man in nature. Yes, you have matched the correct picture with the first stanza. Let's listen to the second stanza now.
Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance.
In the second stanza, the poet talks about stars. Yes, you have matched the correct picture with the second stanza. And now let's listen to the third stanza.
The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought.
In the third stanza, the poet talks about waves. Correct, you have matched the correct picture with the third stanza. And now listen to the last stanza.
For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
In this stanza, the poet talks about a couch, that is a bed. Very good. You have matched the correct picture with the fourth stanza. In exams, you're often asked to write the summary of the poem, and I'm sure now you're able to write it correctly. In this poem, we have studied that daffodils are part of nature. And you've also noticed that the poet feels happy about daffodils, and he has expressed his happiness through the word dancing. He has also compared the daffodils to stars because they twinkle and shine, and waves because they also dance in the same manner. So the poet feels that the daffodils are happier than the stars and the waves. In the last stanza, we have the phrase, the inward eye and bliss of solitude. You might find it very difficult to explain it or to understand it, but it is a very common feeling of every human being. I'm sure you must have some good memories. And when you close your eyes, you feel happy when you think of those memories. And when you think of those memories, they make you even more happy. So, your inward eye or memory or imagination helps you in becoming happy. And this is what is meant by inward eye and solitude. Because the poet has experienced the daffodils. And when he is alone, he closes his eyes and he sees through his inward eye or memory or imagination, and he feels happy about the daffodils. Now let us look at the language of the poem. You must have noticed that we often compare two different things who have similar or which have similar quality. For example, a child and a flower are often compared because both are delicate. In the same way, you can say as white as or as red as. This comparison is known as simile. While talking about similes in this poem, the poet compares himself and clouds because both of them are lonely. And then he compares stars and daffodils because both of them shine. The same way you can use other words and compare other words in your work. With this, we come to the end of the language of the poem, and now we are going to listen to a very interesting discussion between students and their teacher. They would be talking about this poem, The Daffodils, and let's listen to this interesting discussion.
So, what are we supposed to do today?
Wordsworth's Daffodils.
Right, daffodils. Let me tell you a little bit about the poet first. Wordsworth was born in 1770 and died in 1880. So he lived through the French Revolution and he lived through the Industrial Revolution in England. The slogans of the French Revolution were equality, liberty, fraternity. Fraternity, of course, means brotherhood. Now, the Industrial Revolution was destroying the countryside because the factories were being built and the air was being polluted, etc. Wordsworth was very fond of the countryside. So he did not want that the British countryside should be destroyed. With this in mind, you should be able to understand the poetry of Wordsworth very well. Right, now I'll ask you a question. How is nature training Wordsworth for his role as a poet?
Although Wordsworth thinks he is wandering or walking around without purpose, in fact, nature is leading him towards a scene which is very special in its beauty and meaning.
Right, you're right, actually. You know, in this scene, he comes across flowers, daffodils. And he first calls them a crowd, and then he calls them a host. Now, a crowd means something disorganized, and a host means something organized. By calling the flowers organized, by using the word host for the flowers, Wordsworth means that there is organization in nature. That means nature is not a disorganized force, not just wild, but an organized kind of force. And it can change our life too if we accept the organization it gives us. So for this, one has to surrender oneself to nature. And this attitude of Wordsworth is somewhat mystic. He has been brought to this place not out of sheer accident, but because he has surrendered to nature.
The poem is concerned with nature. Was Wordsworth an environmentalist as people are nowadays?
Well, in a sense he was, but he was more a mystic really. And you know, mystics are people who are concerned with nature, and he was concerned with nature. So he wasn't in any political movement as people are nowadays, But in the sense that he cared for nature, yes, he was an environmentalist in that special sense. Well, does the poem have any other message besides this one?
The second and the third stanza depicts a scene which shows his belief in the richness and goodness of nature. There are so many flowers, they all look like the stars in the Milky Way.
Yeah, in a sense you're right, of course. But you know, Wordsworth thinks of nature, not that nature exists for us, but that we exist for nature. In fact, we are part of nature. You see, there's so many things in nature. Small things, big things, living things, non-living things, and all of them are part of nature. The galaxy is huge. It's got so many planets and stars and everything. The Earth is a very small part of the galaxy. Now, for Wordsworth, it is we who are part of nature. We are not, apart from it. That means we are not supposed to exploit nature. We are supposed to be with it as its children are. And if we develop that kind of sense, instead of exploiting nature to make money, then we can be really called nature's children. But, people exploit nature. They cut down the woods, they make paper out of it, they make furniture out of it, etc. And that is the kind of thing which is destroying the earth.
Sir, isn't Wordsworth unhappy with the rapid industrialization he sees around him? Because he feels men are trying to exploit nature and that this will disturb the whole balance of things.
Absolutely. Eventually, as industrialization spreads, the earth will be destroyed more and more. As it is polluted. Even now the situation is so dangerous that the environmentalists are crying out against it. And they're concerned with the pollution as Wordsworth was a long time ago.
What is the impression created by the poem?
The impression created by the poem, yeah. Well, there's movement in it, I believe. The clouds floating, the daffodils fluttering, dancing, tossing their heads, and the waves dancing with them. So we get the idea of movement. And this idea of movement means, of course, that nature is seen as a moving force, which means that it is engaged in development, in growth. So that is my feeling, that of nature being a force which moves.
You mentioned that William Wordsworth looks at nature with the eye of mystic. How?
Well, you know what a mystic is? A mystic is a person who feels that there is something outside, a large force like God, which is outside and which is not dead, which is living and which makes us live. So that is how Wordsworth looks at nature, as if it is not a dead thing, but it's a living thing, a tremendous force which we cannot understand fully, which is outside us. Remember the last stanza? The last stanza is, "For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." So this is the direct link between nature and Wordsworth feeling for it. That means nature is there, it gives us happiness, it is a living force, and that is a mystic kind of belief in nature. That is why I consider Wordsworth a mystic poet. By the way, did you enjoy the poem? Did you like it?
Yes, sir.
You did? Well, good. Thanks very much then. This is the end of the class.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the discussion on the poem. This was meant to give you more information and tell you more about the poem, its movement, and the imagery used in the poem, and also about the poet himself. Now let's do some pronunciation drill. We've chosen a few words from the poem Daffodils. I will pronounce the words first, and you just listen to the words carefully, and when I repeat them, you must repeat the words after me. The first word is wonder, Wales, host, beneath, flutter, jocund, vacant, pensive, solitude, pleasure, daffodils, tossing, continuous, twinkle, and glitter. Well, I'm sure you must have listened to the words very carefully. Now I will repeat the words and you repeat after me. The first word is wonder. Wonder. Whales. Correct. Host. Beneath. Right. Flutter. Correct. Jocund. Jocund. Yes. Vacant. Correct. Pensive. Solitude. Solitude. Pleasure. Daffodils. Daffodils, yes. Tossing. Tossing. Continuous. Twinkle. The last word is glitter. Glitter. Very good. So that was the last part of our program. So before we say goodbye, let's quickly revise what we have covered today. We started our program with a brief introduction about the poet and the poem Daffodils. And of course, we talked about what is beauty. After this, we learned how to do a summary. And we also listened to a very interesting discussion dealing with a poem. And in the end, we learned how to pronounce a few words. With that, we come to the end of our today's program. Hope to see you in our next program.